James Governor, co-founder of RedMonk, and I'm here, I think, with a really interesting conversation today in Conversations with RedMonk. Yeah, we're here to talk about cost optimization and how that can become part of the developer experience. So basically shifting cost optimization left. With me today, I have some excellent people from Spotify that have kindly joined me to talk about what they're doing in this regard. And so I'll hand over to you to introduce yourselves and let's have a chat about what Spotify is doing about cost optimization.
Amazing. Thank you for the opportunity, James. So I'll start off. I go by Jai, and I'm head of core infrastructure at Spotify, which includes, amongst other things, being able to reason and optimize cloud costs. And we have with us Meera and Tim, if you want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Meera Srinivasan. I'm the engineering manager for the cost engineering squad within Spotify. Our focus is presenting the cost awareness to engineers and also recommendations on optimizations.
Yeah, and I'm Tim Hansen, an engineer on the cost engineering team under Meera and part of our core infra and platform organizations at Spotify.
Great. Well, thanks all for joining me. So Jai, talk a bit about the journey that Spotify has been on. I mean, obviously, you're a massive customer of Google Cloud. That's a substantial amount of your budget, and I guess that's why this is important to you. But tell me a bit about your journey towards getting this under control.
Yeah. So firstly, at Spotify, speed is one of these cultural principles that we hold very dear. So there's the saying by Daniel Ek, we aim to fail faster than anyone else. And so that's something that we continue to pride ourselves on. But then in the world of cloud computing, when you move fast, you can also have infinite costs that come back to haunt you. And so we've been through a journey over the last year and a half where we've been able to find a way to reconcile moving fast, moving quickly with some of the startup teams that we have at Spotify, along with some of the mature businesses we have at Spotify, and reconcile that with sustainable cloud costs. And the way that we've done that is instead of having the more traditional, here's a set of top-down things that you have to do, here's a spreadsheet for you to look at, we've gone back to basics and thought about it much more as an engineering problem and how can it fit into our engineering culture. So at Spotify, we have almost 500 engineering teams today. We're doing about 20,000 deployments a day with thousands of microservices. And the reason this works is because there's a lot of autonomy that's given to engineering teams. So we didn't want to come and say, hey, here's something that we're going to do that's going to take away that autonomy because suddenly now you have all these guardrails around costs. Instead, what we wanted to do was create a culture and foster a culture where optimization would be fun. Because one of the things that we know from having engineering backgrounds is that it's fun to optimize, like that's something that I think most engineers really get enjoyment out of. Mm-hmm. And so how can we build a system and a user experience that allows engineers to tap into that core value? So that was really the work that we did in Backstage, which has been open sourced earlier this year, and specifically in Cost Insights, which we open sourced earlier as well, to be able to present engineers, hey, here's how you can work on the things that you need to optimize and don't worry about the rest. Because there's also the other saying that premature optimization is the root of all evil.
Yeah.
So what we try to do in Cost Insights is identify the optimizations that really matter. And for those that don't stress out anybody about it, because ultimately at the end of the day, we're trying to move fast.
I noticed you mentioned Backstage. Now, not everybody that is joining us, watching this will know what Backstage is. So why don't you provide a bit of context about Backstage? And I think that then provides some really nice framing for why it's interesting to have Cost Insights as as part of that platform.
Absolutely. So Backstage is the developer portal that's used at Spotify. It can be best thought of as our central nervous system. So we have all of our components, data pipelines, services etc., managed through Backstage. So you can create a new system in Backstage, you can manage its life cycle, you can look at doing CI/CD, you can look at monitoring, observability, all through Backstage. So it's really both the developer workflows as well as some of the operational workflows integrated into the same place. And the reason why it was important for us to build cost insights into Backstage is because going back to this point about this being an engineer product, we wanted the cost optimizations to be done in a place where engineers are spending the bulk of their time, as opposed to, again, trying to bring a different system, like a third-party system, which engineers are less likely to use. We felt that from a user experience point of view, that would be suboptimal.
Okay. And then I think one other thing that's really worth mentioning is the fact that Backstage is open source. So it's a platform for building developer portals. So this is not just something that Spotify will use, assuming that we see broader adoption. What I think is interesting, I think a lot of people are very keen, they talk about adopting the Spotify model. You've got McKinsey consultants out there evangelizing the Spotify model. So people do want to operate in a way similar to you. And I think having access to similar tooling is potentially quite exciting.
Yeah, I mean, we're excited about the fact that Backstage was adopted as a CNCF sandbox project not too long ago. And we've seen a huge uptick in contributors and folks who are building their own plugins. So that's really the future that we see, because we think it's going to be better for the community to build it together with us than for us to do it alone. And we've seen a ton of contributions and great ideas where people are contributing their own back to Backstage.
Okay, cool. So I feel like I should bring in the others here. Meera, I'm quite interested, about the sort of it's just you call it a product. Obviously, for a lot of people, they'd be kind of saying, wait, isn't this something that's used internally? Is that partly the Spotify culture that everything is a product, even if it is internally? Can you talk a bit about that and how you've worked with the engineering teams to build Cost Insights?
Yeah, Cost Insights, I called it a product. It is actually a plugin within Backstage. It is it's separate from Backstage, so that's why I called it as a product. But it is easily accessible for all the engineers within Backstage who come into Backstage. The way we are building it is we are focusing mostly on the post-MVP systems that are growing faster than the business. And then we're looking at what the excess growth amount is and presenting it to the engineers in terms of FTEs or engineering headcounts. So this speaks very well to the engineers, so they are able to understand what their excess growth is, and they are able to look at the optimization recommendations that we are presenting along with that, and they're able to optimize based on that recommendation.
Okay. And in terms of Jai's talking about it being a game, Meera, how do you make it more game-like? How do you make it a good experience for the developer so that the engineer gets excited and wants to do this?
So the way we are making it a game is really the way we are presenting the information, right? We are presenting it not just in terms of dollars. We are also focusing on presenting the excess growth in terms of FTEs. Mm-hmm. So it's easier for people to understand where they are. It's easier for people to understand how fast they are growing with respect to business. We have plans in future to build some sort of a leaderboard, etc., so that people can really see how they are performing compared to their peers. Right now, our Cost Insights plugin does not have the leaderboard, but these are some of the gaming techniques that we plan to build.
Okay, so I think that FTE focus is really important. Not all organizations are thinking about this today. I mean, traditionally in IT, we certainly, we do think about how many people we have on a team and how we keep costs down accordingly. But I think from Spotify's perspective, you've got a slightly different perspective, sort of measuring everything in terms of FTEs, like what should you automate and why. And I wonder whether that sort of culturally, Tim, maybe you could talk a bit about like what it seems to me when I look at Spotify, like this is something that other organizations could learn from, Because it is a very, very strong focus for you that your teams think in terms of, hang on a second, I could actually get an extra engineer here.
Yeah, that's been one of the challenges for us, is to figure out how to evaluate trade-offs, because it's always a trade-off, whether you're optimizing for cost or reliability, for example, sometimes fights with that a little bit. And teams need to know, like, is this migration worthwhile? How much am I going to save? How much engineering effort should I put into this? So having that engineer calculation allows you to say, well, if I put in 2 engineers for a month and I get 4 back, then that's an obvious win and I should do that. Whereas if it's going to take months and months of effort and only save me half an engineer headcount, then it's probably not worthwhile. And I should focus instead on feature work or other priorities for my team. So that's been one of the challenges, is framing it in a way that you can evaluate trade-offs well. And what we found as well during some of these like hack sprints that we did early on was that people needed more granular information. So you can go to an engineering team and just present them cost, and they say, well, where should I focus my efforts? We have 50 pieces of software. What's the problem? Or where's the problem coming from? So we needed to offer them, for service by service, here's the cost, and workflow by workflow, so they can actually troubleshoot where the cost is.
Okay. So let's talk a bit about that, because I think we haven't mentioned the sort of Spotify has some interesting sort of language, if not code names, in talking about this stuff. Jai, I don't know, are we allowed to talk about? I mean, it's been 2020 has been a year of well, unfortunately not flattening the curve as well as we would like, but certainly Spotify has been trying to bend the curve, and having bent the curve, you're now talking about silver linings. Have I got that right?
Yes. So, like I alluded to earlier, we have definitely gone through a journey here. So when the narrative is move fast and think about cost later, at a certain point, the rubber can meet the road. And certainly we were facing cost cliffs, if you will, at a couple of years ago. And we went through this period of introspection and went through these processes, these build outs around tools like Cost Insights to figure out how can we sustainably bend the curve and how can we do it in a way that's positive for our culture. So this came out of a real issue for us, in that we were facing a cliff that was not sustainable. This is not theoretical for us by any means, but is rather a function of the journey that we've been on over the last couple of years. And hopefully that other curve, the curve that's, the pandemic curve, will follow the same suit.
Oh my goodness, that would be so great. Yeah, definitely the positive news on vaccines is, that's pretty awesome. So Tim, in terms of maybe Tim or maybe Meera, like what are you seeing in terms of adoption? Like, what are the key metrics for you? Is this something that all teams are adopting, or are there some teams that have sort of gravitated to this more quickly? Because I'm really interested in anything that involves changes in developer engineer behaviors. Particularly things like this, where it's not entirely obvious historically that cost optimization is the developer's concern. So what are you seeing about adoption?
We've seen a bit of a split. There are some teams where we introduce them to these tools and they key onto it right away and they start checking it and figure out which optimizations they can do and quickly put that into place. Other teams, we need to prod a little bit more and just ask questions and say, why is this costing so much? Is this appropriate for the business? And sometimes the answer is yes, and that's fine. We don't have a problem with spending or cost growth as long as it's appropriate for our business goals. But other times we need to rein it in and figure out how to optimize. And sometimes that means teams in platform coming over and helping the team in question to kind of figure out how to optimize a workflow, for example, that's running in, data processing or something like that. So sometimes we do a little bit of consultancy. Sometimes teams kind of take it on themselves. But there's been kind of a mixed response, but it's been generally good in that we find if you just make costs visible, then people are kind of motivated to improve that. So it's one of those, the metric doesn't improve until you can see it sort of things.
Have there been any particular sort of breakthroughs? Actually, that's it. Like, so are there, like, does one team look at another? I mean, we don't have the leaderboard yet, but are there some areas where you've just been like, oh my goodness, we've saved so much money that everybody gets excited? Have there been any sort of cases like that?
Well, we do have a virtuous cycle in place where people who are doing cost optimizations are sharing it on a Spotify internal page, and all teams are seeing that. And then another team does their optimization, perhaps inspired by the previous one, and shares it. And that creates a kind of loop where that's part of the gamification, where, you do this cool optimization, you spend a few hours hacking on something and save, 5 FTE worth of time, you share it, somebody sees it, and then other people then follow suit. So that is something that we've been seeing a lot. But I do want to say, like, in terms of teams and adoption, we have kind of 3 categories at Spotify of teams. One is the startup. So these are teams that are not really beyond the MVP phase. And then we have scale up. So these are teams who have vetted an idea and are starting to get to the next phase. And then we have mature businesses. So our Cost Insights product is really targeting the latter 2. So things that are beyond the MVP phase. And so for most of those teams who are in the startup phase, they're going to get a thumbs up. So if you go to the Cost Insights product, the first thing you'll see at the top of that screen is things are looking good here because you don't have to worry about it. Right now, it's the time for you to vet the idea rather than for you to think about cost. So we've seen a lot of adoption in the latter 2, and we're not pursuing the former, which is the startup teams.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So Meera, one of the things I'm always interested in when, building a service or, in order to get adoption would be, sort of the stuff that sort of, some people might make it was boring, like sort of documentation. Is this a tool that needs documentation? How are you structuring your communications with developers, or is it more intuitive because it's already part of Backstage?
It is more intuitive. It is part of Backstage, and we also give a message to the engineers when they go into Backstage how they are doing cost-wise. The Cost Insights plugin has a prime spot in the Manage page where they will know what they are doing, how they are doing cost-wise. And if they drill down, they are going to see a good picture. They all presented in graphs, so it's easily visible to the users, and it's also intuitive. We don't need a lot of explanation to explain the cost model, and we are providing it based on projects, based on products. So there are like different aspects which you will see in the demo, which is more intuitive to the developers. So we really don't need a lot of documentation. But we also go out to the squads to present the Cost Insights to get feedback based on what they feel, so we can incorporate those features back into the product. So it goes both ways.
And in terms of the way Spotify does these things, I mean, if we think about things that begin as sort of pilots and so on, what does your process actually look like for Engage? Like how much research did you do before you kicked off the project, or did you just know there was a problem that needed solving and therefore just building a tool that was applicable would be the right approach?
This product was built after the Bend the Curve effort was completed. So while we were doing Bend the Curve, there was a lot of learnings, right? As Tim was saying, when we presented teams with their cost, they really didn't know what to do with the cost unless we gave them more detailed information, more details about where the cost is leaking. So those kind of ideas, those kind of conversations and experiences were taken into building this product. So, Bend the Curve effort kind of drove what goes into this product.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, for me, I think it's partly because there's sort of a debate in the industry. People say things like, oh, DevOps is a culture change. Therefore, if anyone is trying to sell you a platform, that's maybe snake oil. Like, you can't buy culture change. But I think that can be a little bit short-sighted, that what we want to do is we look at culture and process change, then automate, provide tools and platforms that can support that, and then that can provide a virtuous loop where we do more of the culture change.
Yes, and so I think part of what you were saying earlier with Backstage is that we consider that a way in which companies who are interested in the Spotify culture can start to evaluate which parts of it make sense for themselves and potentially adopt it as an extension of the technology. So an example of that is Spotify. We don't have a centralized SRE team. We do ops and squads. Mm-hmm. And that's really ingrained in the way Backstage was built so that every engineering team can go on call and triage their services. So those kinds of aspects are very ingrained in the technology choices that we've made here and in the way we've built those products.
Okay. Actually, I've got another question on culture then. There's sort of, if we think about, why do we do this? And I think, very often American companies, everything is, effectively everyone is coin operated. So you have to have financial incentives in place, or, this is this is one of your KPIs, or you will not get promoted, or you will not get your bonus if you don't do the sort of cost optimization behaviors. But at Spotify, it's a little bit different. Have I got that right?
Yeah, so there's a lot more of, so when we talk about FTEs, that tends to be the common currency for us. So if you do this optimization, you'll save X number of FTEs for the company. That doesn't actually mean that your particular team is going to get those folks as new developers, right? So this is something that you're basically doing for the greater good of the company. But because of the larger cultural framework that we're in, that has worked for us, and it may not work as well in other companies, which I'll totally acknowledge. But there seems to be a recognition that, hey, this is something we're doing for the greater good. It's fun because we get to optimize, we get to be part of this virtuous cycle. And, it's not inhibiting how fast we're going because we're not putting in the same kinds of guardrails that you'll see at many companies.
Okay. And I guess obviously the tool could be used in that fashion because the metrics are there. And if people did want to tie it to compensation or anything else, that would be up to them.
Yeah, it's open source. So, folks can certainly build those extensions if they wish.
Okay, so you say it's open source. Now, Spotify is very much about Google Cloud. What about tracking other cloud costs? And is there an incentive for you to build tracking for other cloud platforms as well, or what's the story in terms of Crosscloud?
When we first built Cost Insights, we had this eye towards open source, so we always built it with sort of cloud optionality in mind, that you'd be able to bring whatever products you have. So right now, you can plug in AWS products to Cost Insights as well, just as easily. We're not dictating which cloud you need to be on. You can even have a mix of products from AWS and GCP. So it's really designed with that in mind. That being said, we're largely on GCP, so that's kind of how we've used it. And in some sense, there may be differences in how other companies operate that don't kind of align with how we operate. Like, does a particular team own a particular billing resource, for example, or is there one billing resource for the entire company? Those kinds of things might kind of diverge from how we use Cost Insights. And that's, I think, where other companies can really contribute to make this a more broadly applicable product. We're welcoming that kind of outside perspective because we're kind of, we have our certain way of going about things, and that may not fit with other companies. So I think that's the advantage of open source, is you get all those outside perspectives and you can get contributions to make the product better.
Indeed. Well, I mean, Spotify has certainly taken great advantage of open source technology over the years. You're gonna learn a lot and get some scar tissue and learn a lot about open source governance as you move forward with Backstage and Cost Insights. Okay, that is super interesting. That's Cost Insights from Spotify and the Backstage platform. I'm going to be doing a little bit of work looking at this platform. I think it's an important issue. shifting cost optimization left. That's exciting. Thank you, Jai, Meera, and Tim for joining us today, and look forward to future conversations.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Thank you.